What's going on, guys? Apathettic here, and today I want to talk about skill-based matchmaking being removed and why I think that's a good thing. In Bungie's most recent TWAB, they announced changes to Crucible matchmaking, saying that matchmaking based on player skill has been removed from all playlists except Elimination, the Survival and Survival Freelance playlist, and Trials, of course, is still Trials. Immediately within the community, you saw a lot of people celebrating, myself included, but you also saw a lot of people who, as with anything in Destiny 2, take the "well, I guess I'm done with this game now" hyperbolic approach like they do anytime Bungie announces any change they are unhappy with. So in this video, I'm going to address those that feel having skill-based matchmaking in every playlist is a good thing, and my main points I'm going to cover is debunking this idea that low skill players need to be protected from high skill players, how skill-based matchmaking over time degrades the overall experience of the player base, and lastly, how skill-based matchmaking does have a place in Destiny, but it's a very specific place. Ultimately, I hope this changes some people's minds on the topic and keeps them from reading way too much into any time they lose a match in the Crucible going forward. Let's get into it. Now, a lot of people who argue for skill-based matchmaking typically have the argument that if you remove skill-based matchmaking from a game or playlist, then you are essentially opening the floodgates of a playlist to high-skill players who are coming to just come in and stomp out casuals over and over again, and hence why skill-based matchmaking is necessary to protect these lower skill players or players that are new to the game from getting stomped out of existence. Now, I'm being intentionally hyperbolic here, but this is honestly the way a lot of people describe this post-apocalyptic future of games without skill-based matchmaking. Now, to start debunking this idea, we need to focus on the fact that the top 10% of players are just that. They are the minority, not the majority. The chances of you running into these players frequently is very low. Using Destiny Tracker, I did some digging. I want to see how many players on all platforms have a KD of 2.0 or higher. And yes, I know KD is not the only measurement of skill, but it's a pretty good baseline. Using Destiny Tracker, I was able to find 17,201 players who have a KD at 2.0 or higher, then comparing that to the amount of players that played yesterday in the Crucible, which was roughly 458,000. And then we do some quick maths, and your top players across all platforms comes out to 3.7%. But again, I'll be generous and I'll call it 4%. Your high skill players make up 4% of the players, and this is for all platforms. So, it could skew up or down depending on the platform, but I'd wager it doesn't go any higher than 10%. And I think 10% is a stretch, and that's not factoring in things like time zones and the fact that all these players aren't even going to be on at the same time. It's a numbers game, and the chances of you running into one of these players is so very, very low. And to think that suddenly turning off skill-based matchmaking is going to result in all the casuals getting stomped out of existence isn't logical. There isn't enough high skill players in the game to make that happen. But Appa, what about when a casual does match a good player? They're just going to leave and quit the game. This again, I find to be hyperbolic. Because if a player plays a high skill player once and that's enough to make them quit Destiny, chances are they weren't that into the game in the first place. And if they are new to Destiny, then the expectation is they're going to be a learning curve. I didn't jump on Valorant and expect to be the best player, and people jumping headfirst in the Crucible should have the same expectation. But ultimately, the amount of times this scenario will actually play out is not going to be that high, and at the end of the day, it will create a more varied experience. Not every gunfight will be a sweat fest against someone of similar skill level. Some players in a match will be good, and some will be average or bad. This allows you to still get kills and occasionally get outgunned by a better player and hopefully learn from them. Versus skill-based matchmaking, every fight is so close and every fight is sweaty and hard, and the games go on long and everyone average is a 1.5 KD. That is not fun for anyone on any level of play. And so let's talk about how removing skill-based matchmaking actually creates a better overall experience for players. Skill-based matchmaking is designed to ensure that you are matching opponents based on your skill level. How it does this is it prioritizes your skill first and connection second. The system works its best when it has a larger player base. Since more players are playing, then it has a larger pool of players to match you with that are around your skill level. But as population decreases, it takes longer to find players of your skill level, and the amount of time only increases as your skill level increases, because as I mentioned previously, the amount of high skill players is not very high, and if you fall in that bracket, it's going to take longer to find players because sometimes they aren't there, and this applies to lower skill levels as well. Because the less people there is, the harder it is to match with those of your skill level, and thus the search parameters start reaching farther and farther in terms of people's location. This results in a match where everyone is similarly skilled, poor connection quality because the search parameters had to go farther than normal to find these players of similar skill. Now, in a game where skill-based matchmaking is involved, you want to have the fairest fight against these players, but because we introduce terrible connection quality, everything gets tainted, because we have all had those games where it feels like you're fighting take and thrall and everyone is teleporting everywhere and it is nothing but laggy trades. This is where we have been with skill-based matchmaking. It degrades the overall experience of the game when it is enabled, and it typically only works best when games are at their peak of popularity, like for Destiny example is when an expansion or new season comes out. This is not sustainable over time as people take breaks, try other games, etc. So to implement or fight for something to be in a majority of game modes, while at first may be fine, but will over time get worse and worse and degrade the overall player experience. Not to mention that when skill-based matchmaking is enabled, it impacts overall loadout diversity. This is where when you go into what is supposed to be a casual mode and everyone is using meta weapons and it's a sweat fest. This brings me to discuss how skill-based matchmaking does have a place in Destiny, it just needs the right environment. In this week's TWAB, Bungie stated that modes like Survival and Elim will still have skill-based matchmaking, and this is where I think skill-based matchmaking belongs. These modes traditionally play a lot more competitively and are attached to a glory point system, which is essentially just a poor implementation of ranked play. It also requires less players as well, which helps limit the impact of poor connection quality when it's searching for players of similar skill level. It's also a designated mode that I can go to now if I want to sweat or focus on improving. Modes like Classic Mix and Control are inherently more casual and relaxed modes. This separation between high stakes playlists and more relaxed playlists is important. When every playlist has skill-based matchmaking in it, it creates an environment where I as a player, whether I'm low skill or high skill, I don't have anywhere where I can just play and unwind or play with friends. As someone in a higher skill bracket, playing with my friends is miserable, not only for me but for them. They get dragged into my skill bracket and are just miserable because they have to play players of my skill because of skill-based matchmaking. Now we will be able to play together and it will be a mixed bag of players we will be going against, and everyone has a chance to enjoy themselves. But if I want a more competitive and sweaty environment, I have Trials and the Survival playlist to fulfill that craving. The last thing I'll say, and I mentioned this briefly earlier, is the ability of a playlist where I can try fun loadouts. Before in the 6v6 playlist, everyone is just using the meta because they have to in order to survive because of skill-based matchmaking. Now I can go in and actually try out different things without feeling like I can't compete because everyone is just meta using sweat lords at no fault of their own because of skill-based matchmaking. And it's creating this competitive edge in a playlist that is inherently more relaxed and laid back. With these new changes, the chances of me needing to switch to meta weapons will be significantly reduced, and even more for casual players who may not have all the meta weapons that other players may have, they will now be able to enjoy themselves as well. Overall, I hope this video opens people's minds up to the idea that removing skill-based matchmaking is not a bad thing, and ultimately it is still in the game and in areas that are more appropriate for that type of feature. I'm more than open to discuss this and more in my comments below. Just remember to keep it respectful. As always, if you enjoyed, make sure you like, share, and subscribe as a free way to support me, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.